Hi, today on the show, I would like to welcome our guest, Donna Pasani. She's a pastor and a Bible teacher with 40 years of ministry experience. She's the author of The Power of Not Yet in her new book, Entrusted to Lead. She has a Master's of Arts and Ministry. I knew I was going to say that wrong. I'll have to get this part out. Ministerial leadership from Southeast University and a DM and from George Fox University, focusing on women in leadership. She also co-founded Capital City Church alongside her husband, and she's a co-founder of the Circle of 12, a mentoring program for women leaders. And her family includes 4 adult children, 2 son-in-laws, and 2 adorable grandchildren. And I'm so excited for this conversation today because not only has Donna been leading in churches and now leading women through her books and other mentoring, but she's just, she has so much rich knowledge of the Bible and just, she has so much to share with us women. So I know it's going to encourage each of you in your lives, and I can't wait to share this episode with you. So welcome, Donna.
Thank you. It's so good to be here. Such an honor to be here.
Oh, I love
Thanks
it.
for having me.
Yeah, I'm so excited to connect with you. So, what I'd love for you to do first is just share with us a little bit about your journey and your story. You have lots of ministry and leadership and mothering experience. So, what would you love to share with the audience today?
Well, I think probably this leadership journey wasn't anything that I was looking for. I was kind of invited into it. I had a lot of resistance because I didn't consider myself a leader or even an influencer, to be honest with you. And so, like right off the get-go, I just want to encourage anybody who's listening, you don't have to be in a leadership position or even consider yourself an influencer to even like lean into this conversation. I feel like every woman or man who's listening, you are influencing somebody. And so to me, that was like a huge breakthrough to realize that God had entrusted me with something. And so my journey was I didn't want to be necessary. I was in ministry because my husband was in ministry. We led together because my husband felt like he didn't want to lead by himself. He wanted us to lead together as a husband and wife. And so even in the areas where I felt insecure and I was like, I don't have that gift. I can't speak publicly. I can't really, what kind of wisdom do I have? Dennis kept pulling it out of me. So I'm incredibly grateful that I married a man who's confident enough in his own gifts to pull out mine. And that may not be your journey if you're listening today, but what I've discovered is that God will give you, and the reason why I wrote the book is for anybody who maybe hasn't had that in their journey. So Dennis and I traveled overseas, did missions for the first 12 years of our ministry time together. I got married when I was 20. So the first 12 years we traveled overseas, everything from backpacking Bibles in the Himalaya mountains to crusades around the world, and then felt God calling us to start a church in Washington, D.C. And so quite the adventure. We didn't know how to do it. We could probably write another book on 4,000 ways on how not to plant a church because we have so many. But what I've discovered is that God uses those mistakes in those areas that we would consider maybe even failures in the beginning. There's always a chunk of wisdom in there. And so we did that and then just recently transitioned the church. My heart has always been, I've been obsessed with the idea of leadership. So once I discovered that I was being invited into this space or entrusted with it really is probably the better terminology. I wanted to learn as much as I could. Well, here's the problem that I found is that, you can learn I can learn leadership from anybody. I can learn it from a donkey. I can learn it like I'm just hungry to learn. I'm curious about everything. You could be younger than me, older than me, whatever. I can learn from you. But most leadership books or books on influence are written by men, which is fine. I can learn from them, but there are unique challenges as a female that men maybe don't have to face the same challenges as we do. And so then I found that there were some books written by women, but they always had this slight nuanced anger at men. And I wasn't angry at men. And I feel like if you are angry at men, then that's a whole nother conversation that God wants to heal you of. I do believe that really, in order to see what God wants to do in this day and in this season, it's going to take all hands on deck. And I call it in the book, #same team. So it's all of us working together using our gifts. And so that's what started me. I never felt smart enough, went back to school in my 50s, got a master's and doctorate degree, and then wanted to use the research that I discovered at that point in my life, even though I'd been in leadership for so long. How can I now distill this information in an easy to read book that anybody can pick up? I wanted to feel like you were being mentored, coached, and having a cup of coffee with an old friend while you're gaining the wisdom from my mistakes. So that's my story, and that's where I am right now. And now this part of my life, I'm just at this age, I just love being able to speak into other women, so that maybe you, if you're listening to, you don't have to go through some of the same things I did, because you can glean some wisdom from what I wrestled with for a lot of my life, far too long. So that's the
Absolutely.
heart. That's who we are. We have 4 children. I'm obsessed with my grandchildren. And my favorite time is hanging out with the whole family. We're Italian, so it's loud and noisy. Lots
Oh,
of
I
food.
love it. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, there's so much wisdom and so many nuggets in your book. And I think the first thing that I want to, you kind of touched on this, but I want to say is, for anybody listening that might say, well, I'm not in a major church role, or, I don't feel like I'm a leader of anything. I want to say something, and I want you to kind of respond and kind of add to it. But, one thing I say it differently, but I say, all of us have a ministry. It's the ministry of you, which points people hopefully back to Jesus. But in other words, no matter what we do, how we're showing up in our lives, we might be leading in our homes. We might be leading in smaller church roles. We might be leading a church. We might be an influencer, like you said, where like I have the podcast. Well, I'm not a leader in a traditional sense, but I am in the sense of that I'm providing content and encouragement and scripture, right, to people that listen. So what would you just share with women that might hear this and say, like you mentioned, you don't have to be in a traditional leadership role to still be a leader in your life. So what would you share with us about
Yeah,
that?
it's a good question. It's a really great question. In fact, yesterday I did we filmed, there's a television program, woman talk show called Better Together, and we filmed it yesterday. And that was one of my questions to the women that were like women that you would know. They're pretty well known in Christian circles. And that was like, what was the narrative that you heard in your head that prevented you from stepping into ministry, or stepping into leadership, or even recognizing that you were an influence? And every single one of them talked about how the failure that they faced in their life, or the obstacle or the fear that they faced in their life, kept that buried for far too long. But how God, when they were willing to remove the shame from that, they were willing to actually be open to hear whatever it was that God wanted to use that healed space. So one of them had a mental breakdown, and so God wanted to use that healing space. Another one just didn't feel like she had a voice. Another one was the marginalization that she felt as a female. Like, each of them had their own story, but all of it went back to the lie that the enemy speaks to us to keep us silent, or to make us feel like we don't have like enough. And what I've discovered, and you have too, I'm sure, is that God, you want the capacity and the gift that looks like an oak tree, right? I want it to be fully formed. I want it to have the fruit before I actually say yes to it. And God, like 99% of the time, gives me an acorn. And he's like, and I would
Right.
miss it
Yeah.
3/4 of the time, like most of us do. And I did for many years. It's always going to come in seed form, because you have to grow with the gift so you can handle what God produces through you. So it doesn't matter if you're a stay-at-home mom homeschooling, or you're a CEO in a corporation, or you're serving in a church, or whatever it is, you are uniquely entrusted. Every one of you is uniquely entrusted with gifts. It's just opening your eyes to see it. So
Absolutely. You said two things kind of that spoke to that in your book. One was, you said comparison will always make you miss what God has uniquely entrusted you to, which is what you just kind of spoke to, right? That we have to be careful, right? That the shame and the blame and the guilt and the feeling there's a lack of in us, or like you said, whatever lie we're telling ourselves is holding us back, right, from what God has for us. And then you said, and I loved this, your creator loves the sound of everything, every attempt, even if it looks like a failed one. And I thought that that was a pretty key message in the book, which is, we all sometimes feel like failures in something we did or tried, right? Or didn't work out, we
yes.
didn't think. But what would you just say to that? Because I think that's pretty major, that if we could see failures differently, if we could see them
Yeah.
as actually a growth, and that God's using that attempt for his good.
Yeah, it's really good. I don't know if you're like me, but have a PhD in perfectionism. I
Not
want
so
it to be
much, I thought.
perfect. And then I can, like at midnight, have these ridiculous conversations in my head about how I should, could have, would have done it. Like,
Yeah.
why did I say that? Or why didn't I say that? Or that didn't work out the way I wanted it to. So I think you have to know failure is part of life,
Yeah.
and it is part of growing. And, any airplane that takes off in the air is the equal and opposite resistance that allows it to take off. So you're going to face resistance and you're going to grow from it. I think for me, one of the biggest breakthroughs, and this was like maybe 15 years ago, was realizing that every failure, fear, obstacle, everything is can be used in one of two ways. It can be used as an indicator of a gift in your life, or it can be used as an intimidator. And I far too long used it as an intimidator, and then shame sits there. The problem with shame is it hides where God is the most present. So our vulnerability to God to say, you know what? This is the area I really don't want anybody to know about, but God, I'm surrendering it to you. You can use it. And that, like, shame is the worst. And I let it speak to me for far too long. But I do think you're going to face failure. It just means you're attempting and trying. And honestly, I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago, and I was in this really powerful moment of worship, and I was reflecting over my life and areas that were still kind of like, if I looked at them, I know I grew from them, but still kind of like, Lord, that was a little bit painful, whatever, whether it was me making stupid decisions or responding. And I saw it was this beautiful picture of the Lord just taking my hand and saying, okay, but I need you to see that from my standpoint. You didn't stop. You said yes. And it was like he was holding my hand, bringing me to the next season, and then the next season and the next season. And at the end of it, I just felt like who he had formed in me through the process. And now there's a confidence. Like, I've walked through hell and back, but I have no question that God isn't with me. I have no question that there isn't redemption, restoration, in everything that I face, because the prize, honestly, is not just you getting the answer to prayer, but you discovering who God is and that intimacy of walking through it. So if you faced failure, stop letting it beat you up. That is just the devil trying to silence and stop the redemption side of whatever you've walked through. God's bigger
Yeah,
than that.
absolutely. And kind of still on that a little bit, but you said also how when we push past, right, this comparison or the fear or failure, that we grow every time, right? And so I think just reminding people that that's to be expected, and we have to kind of push through. I think you mentioned push through the obstacles, because that's actually how we're becoming who God's calling us to be, I think, in our lives.
Yeah.
And you asked a really interesting question that was about the whole, is it an indicator? You say something like, what is this fear or failure, battle or obstacle indicating? So how can people
Yes.
use that question in their lives to make sure that they're challenging themselves, right? To not make it an indictment, if you will. When we feel these scarcity or these fear-based stories or lies.
It's really good. I mean, first of all, I think if you're listening, this is common. Everybody feels this. There aren't like some people that like have it all together and know everything, and then you're like not them. Like, everybody, doesn't matter who you are, and you're going to feel this the rest of your life, because God's going to keep inviting you into spaces that are bigger than you are.
Mhm.
And so what I've discovered is exactly what you said. I just pray, okay, Lord, what is this fear indicating? Like, what is behind, what am I really afraid of that will happen? Most of the time it was that I'd fail, or I wouldn't be sufficient. Like, I wasn't enough to complete the task. But again, God's always putting me, like when I was writing this book, I was like, who am I to write this book? Like, I don't even have a gift. Like, I hate writing. But at the end of the day, and then getting the edits back, and then hating the editor because I didn't like what she edited. I
Yeah,
was like, you
yeah.
just edited, feeling offended by the edits. At the end of the day, though, all of those things that you keep, when you look at what's behind it, sometimes it's God editing us, like the way we look at ourselves, that we look at ourselves as a failure. And God's like, no, I don't see you as a failure. You're my daughter. You're a daughter of the King. You're saying yes. And ultimately, I think God created us to feel as though we don't have enough. Because when I feel like I have enough, then I don't ask God for help.
Right. That's right.
So the scarcity mentality that if only I had blank, then I could do blank. I mean, that's as old as the Garden of Eden. Adam and Eve started feeling entitled to more, forgetting what they'd already been entrusted with. And so I think the fear wants to make you forget what you've already been given, rather than seeing what you feel entitled to. So yes, if you're feeling fear, and also, like, side note, like, I'm not going to, like, if you give me a 7-Eleven gift card that's worth $5, I'm not going to, like, if I lost it, of course I'd be upset, but not like if you gave me a Ritz-Carlton vacation,
Right.
right? like, great, I'm not going to lose that. Why? Well, because you guard what has value. And if the enemy's working really hard to steal whatever God's entrusted you with, fear and those lies that you've been listening to your whole life that have become truth to you, then let that be an indicator of the value God has placed on you, not just the gifts you have, but just on you as a human. And let that shake off the lies from the enemy. The enemy works really hard to silence people who have great value.
Absolutely. I love it. And yeah, I mean, even starting the podcast and doing it, it was easy for me to try to have thoughts. Well, I'm not a pastor, right? I didn't go to school, get my divinity degree at this point, or, and I had to just keep, saying that is not the truth, right? Like just because I haven't done that doesn't disqualify me, right? To do
Yes.
what I think God was calling me to do. And so, or looking at the stats, right? The whole idea of we live in a world that people, we are shown by the world that comparison matters when we know it does not, right? But
Yes.
it's hard to not say, look at all these people that are ahead of me, right? Or are further than me, or have a bigger
Yes.
audience. And to keep reminding myself, my job isn't to make it a certain size, it's to be consistent and faithful and, to
Yes.
be a steward of coming on here and sharing, messages of hope and faith and the word. So, but once again, we all struggle with these things and we have to
Yeah.
just keep calling it out, and saying, is this actually true? And it's
Yeah.
usually not.
Yeah. That's really good. I had this thought this morning. I might post it on Instagram in the next week or so, but we too often measure our influence or our success by the size of our platform. And I think if God entrusts you with a large platform, awesome, go with it. But it is, I think, the anonymity and in the quiet spaces and in the more personal spaces that God can do some of his deepest. I mean, he can do his deepest work both places, because it's God, right? He can use a donkey, he can use me. But the point is, like, stop. Our world celebrates big,
Yep, absolutely.
and that's not the kingdom of God.
Right. Yeah,
God
absolutely.
celebrates faithfulness and the faithful yes and the faithful steps. I mean, I want to get to heaven and not feel like I've missed this moment of entrustment because I have been waiting till it got to a certain size to be used. So
Right.
I just want to say to you, thank you. I don't know anything about the podcast. I'm just meeting you today and I'm so
Yeah.
delighted to do that, but I'm incredibly grateful. And I know for me, the wanting to hide the size, like maybe you haven't done that, but for me, when I didn't feel like I had a platform, I was like, well, who am I to say anything? Like, who's going to listen? Well, if the one person hears you today or
That's right.
hears me today, I'm going to get to heaven and God's going to be like, well done.
Yeah.
You said yes.
Absolutely. One author, a Christian author, Mary Rance, she says stuff around that often, which is so often we don't want to celebrate wins or small wins because we don't think they're big enough because of comparison, right? In other words, we think,
Exactly.
oh, I'll celebrate win, right? I'll celebrate win. And then we hold back on celebrating things that and when I say accomplished, it's not about that, it's about it, it sounds like a vanity metric, but the point is
Yes.
we should celebrate that we've put in 3 years
Yes.
or 40 years, right? You were in ministry and leadership, and you
Yes.
are still in leadership. But instead of hiding those things, to your point, it's
Yes.
because we're letting worry or fear or shame, like I'm not as big. And so it is,
Yes.
those are real things that we're going to, that are going to confront us. And we have to just remind ourselves that, to your point, is he calling me to do this, right? And like you said, is it one person or 100, 1,000 or 10,000 people or 10 million? It doesn't matter. It's that we're showing up and we're sharing what God has,
Yes.
we're leading or ministering how God's asked us to do it.
Yeah. I think it is almost like a pushback on what the culture tells us. Cause, um, I mean, Jesus says, if you have faith the size of a grain of mustard seed. So
Yes.
I love how he uses small things to start
Right.
moving forward. But it's also in the small steps that God, I think, grows us the most.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I would hate for anybody listening to wait. Shelley Giglio calls it destination addiction.
Mhm.
So we are addicted to the destination, but we miss sight of the power of process and how God actually has wired us to be transformed in the process. So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
I often it's related to that. It might not sound like it at first. I often have to remind myself that it's the power of the present moment, or it's in the small details of my day that often have much more impact in my
Yes.
changing my heart and in God's world. Like taking time out of my day and going and seeing my dad who has pretty advanced Parkinson's, or it's going and doing something for a neighbor. So I think sometimes we forget it's the small things that have great impact instead of
Yeah.
the big thing that we do that we think we might be doing that day. And so I often have to remind myself of that, that it's in those moments, right, that we're changing minds or ideas or hearts or whatever it might be.
Yeah. Oh, you're right. I have to remind myself the same thing.
Yeah, yeah. So
So
what would you share with us? Some people listening might think, well, this whole idea of leadership, and maybe they've heard messages in the past where women aren't meant to lead, or especially in the church. And so, of course, the Bible's
yeah.
filled with examples, and your book goes through so many of them. What would you just share with people, that maybe haven't heard, more about the women of the Bible and how they were the helpers and they were helping build the church? Mary being the first, right, to be there or to be told, hey, I'm Jesus, he's back, right? And so, what would you just share with us to encourage us as women to show up?
Yeah. And yeah, because I'm sure that people listening are in all varied. So, and the point of my book is not to convince you of anything. I don't think theology should be weaponized. I don't think
Yes.
it's for combat. I think it's for confidence.
Mhm.
And so the whole idea is to make you hungry. And for many of us, we have just believed theology that's unchecked. Like we haven't really, like we've just been handed it. We haven't necessarily done the research ourselves. And even though I was leading in ministry, it wasn't until I went back to school, which you don't have, the reason why I wrote the book is you don't have to go back to school, just read the book.
Yeah.
It was when I went back to school that I became fascinated with, okay, well, is there other scriptures besides Joel 2 that talks about women having a voice? And so this is what really spurred on the book was this revelation that Mary was in the garden with the burial spices, her and a few other women, after Jesus had died on the cross. So they go back to this garden tomb and they're getting ready to dress his body. And Mary notices that the tomb is empty. And so she runs to get Peter and John, comes back. This is John chapter 20. Peter and John, they come, they look, they don't, the tomb's empty. And then Mary, after they leave, Mary takes a second look. And I just think, to me, that's the whole theme of this whole book. Can we take a second look at what we've always believed?
Yeah.
Can we take a second look at the failures? Can we take a second look at the obstacles that we're facing and just kind of see them differently? So when she looks differently, looks again, this time it's not empty, but she sees two angels. So I can't imagine like that's like heaven on earth in the middle of this tomb, this dead place. And they're saying to her, why are you crying? Who are you looking for? And then she notices, she begins to explain to them. And then she notices next to her who she considers to be the gardener, which obviously is Jesus. But I don't think it's any mistake that she thinks he's the gardener. So he asks her, who are you looking for? Why are you crying? And she begins to talk to him and tell him the story. Like she doesn't recognize him because he showed up different. And I think a lot of times in our own lives, we miss where Jesus is showing up because he's showing up different than the way we expect. We won't show up a certain way with the answer, and he's showing up different. So, anyways, they start talking, and then he says her name, which was familiar, but I'm sure different because there's resurrection on his voice. And her response to him is Rabboni, which means teacher. Okay, so if we don't understand cultural context, then we wouldn't understand how unusual this was and culturally not accepted. So women in that day they would learn, they had learned some of the law, the Judaic law, because they had to, do Passover meals, whatever, there were specific purity laws, but they were not part of the deep teaching that a rabbi would do. Jesus was the only rabbi who had a co-ed followership, which was stunning. Like if you don't, like this blew my mind. I hadn't even thought about it because we have no problem in our church today. And so then she says, Rabboni, he doesn't correct her and say, no, women can't be taught. No, what he responds with is so groundbreaking. He says, go tell my brothers that I've risen from the dead. This was the scripture that shifted everything for me. Because in this, like if you don't again understand the culture, and that culture, a woman's testimony could not be allowed in a court of law. Legally, she had no value to her voice. Women, children, slaves had no value. They were considered almost like dirt. But yet Jesus shows up to a woman and says, go tell. So he gives her a voice. He's given all of us a voice. And I love this, that she is standing, because if you don't connect the whole Bible, the Bible's one cohesive story. So she's in the second garden with Jesus, who has just redeemed the sin from the first garden in Genesis.
Yeah.
And the promise over Eve was that her seed would crush the head of the enemy. Well, Jesus has just crushed the head of the enemy by being raised from the dead. And he's now with a woman. So for thousands of years, women have had no value, they're marginalized because they were the ones who were the temptress. And now Jesus, he could have showed up to Peter and John. They were just there. It wasn't like he was having coffee and he forgot. He was like, shoot, too late. Well, Mary's here. No, he was intentional because he was redeeming, restoring the garden that Adam lost, speaking to a woman and giving her a voice. And so those words still echo over us. They're not like just, and it wasn't just tell resurrection as a noun. I'm like preaching a whole message right here, but I'm so fired up about this because I feel like, why have we missed this? Why did I miss it my whole entire life? Like, even though my husband gave me permission, I often felt like, do I have permission to speak? But this is Jesus, the head of the church, giving the woman a voice. And those words, go tell, are echoing, like wherever you're listening to this podcast right now, those words still have life to them. They haven't died. They're not expired. God is still speaking over you. You have a voice as a female. And what did he tell her to say? That I've risen from the dead. So resurrection obviously is a noun, powerful, the most important event in all of history. But resurrection is a verb and a lifestyle. So we have the power in our mouths from the head of the church to speak life over any graveyard or anything that appears like it's hopeless. We can declare hope into the darkest places. And so I think that's why the battle has been so intense over women's voices. Hidden. Wow. I didn't know that the head of the church gave me permission to use my voice. And so, and then there's more studies throughout, but that's, to me, was the initial like aha moment in the scriptures that then led me down a trail to study even more. Okay, well, if Jesus gave her a voice, what else did Jesus do with women?
So powerful. I mean, obviously, so powerful. Wow. Thank you for sharing that on the podcast as well as obviously in the book. So what would you tell us about Here I Am? You know, you talk about that throughout the book. What is it? He, Navy. But would you,
yes.
right. So I know you kind of, there's different parts throughout the book. You keep bringing that up. So what would you just share with us about that concept?
So Hinene, honestly, I'm not sure that I'm saying it correctly either. So it's a very sacred Hebrew term. And anytime you see the phrase, here I am, or here am I, it literally is that term, Hinene. And that was used generally, like Moses said it, Abraham said it, Isaiah said it, Paul said it, like here I am, here am I. It's a surrender. It's not kind of like, here I am over here, like, don't forget about me. Did you hear my prayer? It's more like, okay, here am I. And it's at a cross point. It's at a crossroads. It's a pivot point. It's kind of like, Lord, I don't fully understand what's happening, but you've got me. I'm here. I'm saying yes. And I think oftentimes that if we miss the surrender, then we miss the revelation that God wants to show us in the middle of where we are, the transformation, because we're still wrestling with what we're going through rather than just like, I don't understand. Like, I still don't understand 3/4 of the things I went through. I know now that what I learned is invaluable, but it was my surrender. And I wonder if we've lost the art of surrender. And so that was why I put that in the book. And at the end of every chapter, I give you a moment to have a Hinene moment so you can actually process what God's speaking to you in the book.
Yeah, no, it's, I mean, not just the term, right, and what it means, but yeah, it's woven and lovely because to your point, are we surrendering? Are we saying yes to what God is trying to take us into, even when we're not really certain, right, what that turn or that path is? And so it's quite beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. So what about, I know probably later in the book, you talk about how do we learn and discover and use what God's made us for, but what kind of tools, I know you talk about assessments and understanding our gifts, but what would you say for so many of us that maybe haven't done a assessment or we're not familiar with it, Enneagram or whatever it might be, like, are there tools, are there things that you say, look, we can be women of God, we can step into more if we better understand who he made us to be? So what would you share with us about that?
I think probably the first part of that is recognizing that he's good, he loves you, and that he's entrusted you with something. So again, I oftentimes don't see what God's entrusted me with because I'm comparing my one talent. The Bible tells a story about the
Yes.
talents.
Yes.
So I compare my one talent with you. You are doing a podcast, so you must have at least 3 or 5 talents. So then, just like the story of the talents, I can hide because I feel entitled to more. My insecurity makes me feel like, well, when God gives me more, then I'll use it. So first of all, the understanding and the knowledge that God's entrusted you with something. The second thing is just like, what do you do? What do you love? Like, ask yourself the question, what gives me the most life? Like, where do I feel the most connected to who I am? God will always use your experience. He will use your failures. I was sexually abused as a child. That story of how God has healed me has brought healing, and has shut down shame for thousands of women because I was willing to share that story. So I think that's the first thing. Like, maybe make a list, like, where do I feel the most alive? Or where did I feel the most tension? Or where are the areas that I want to hide the most? Like, actually write them down, because that's oftentimes where God has given you an entrustment. I think the second thing is that if you're in a situation and you keep seeing problems, opportunities often come dressed like a problem. So
Right.
if you're seeing the problem, then you most likely are part of the solution. And the solution often, like, you may not have the wisdom or the know-how how to fix that. But first of all, you can start with prayer, and then you can ask God, what am I supposed to do with this problem that I'm seeing? And how can you use whatever you've entrusted me with to see the situation changed? And so I find oftentimes my greatest entrustment grew. So where our church was in a area that was had a lot of disadvantaged children and families, and there was a lot of drug use and grandmas raising their kids. And so, and we kept inviting these people to church, and they just weren't coming to church. So I was like, okay, this is the problem, but why don't we bring church to them? So we bought an old truck and let the side down into a platform. And, I'm the worst. I have no rhythm at all, at all. Doesn't matter what kind of music you're playing for me. I have no rhythm. So we started playing all kinds of hip hop music. I brought my kids with me. I had 4 kids. The oldest was 13 at this point. Just brought them with me. When knocking on doors, invited these kids, had snacks. And then we had food bags for the families. And I have no idea what I'm doing. And I'm terrified, but I see a need and a problem. And I just said yes. And honestly, I think that's probably one of the places where my leadership grew the most, because then I was able to learn how to build a team, and I was able to, it was the need and the problem that helped me discover the gift that was inside of me. And oh my gosh, still brings tears to my eyes when I think about the families that were transformed by a
Yeah.
scared yes.
I love that. Yeah. And so many of us have those scared yeses. The question is just, are we going to, be willing to take that first step, right, in that
Yeah.
direction? So yeah, I love that. So what would so one thing, this sort of talks about something we talked about this a little bit earlier, but you have a whole chapter in the book about the obstacles. And we did kind of touch on that a little bit with the fear and the shame. But what would you just share with us about walking through obstacles and why that's so important, right? Because a lot of us want to just go, maybe it's going to go the other way, right?
Yeah.
The grit, but the grit and why we need to kind of keep going towards that obstacle, or in some cases at
Yeah.
least.
No, that's good. And actually, there was a couple of books that I read in my leadership journey that kind of transformed the way I looked at even finding your gifting. And one of them was Anna Duckworth wrote a book called Grit. And
Yes.
she's a researcher, and she did, you've probably, I don't know if you've read the book, but it's
Yeah.
phenomenal because she did this research, and she dispels the idea that the only people that are successful are people with huge amounts of talent. But it's the practice, it's the continuance to continue using what you have, pushing past the obstacles. I mean, that's obviously how muscle grows, right? You keep
Right.
lifting resistance weights. And so I found, because I am so driven, that and I like results. And if I'm going to plan something, I want to make sure that I see the outcome that I'm working towards. And oftentimes what hindered me is I carry the weight of the outcome more than just the weight
Oh,
of
yes.
obedience and saying
Mhm.
yes. And are you like that too? Like, it just drives me nuts.
About some things, but no, I've just heard an amazing quote that's exactly about that. That's sort of what holds
Oh,
us back, is worrying about, I'll have to find it later. But when we focus on the outcome, instead of just what is it we're supposed to be working on. It can literally
Yes.
just cause everything, the anxiety, the stress, all the stuff. But sorry to interrupt you. Sorry, keep
Yeah,
going.
no, I wanted to hear the quote. Send it to me.
No,
So
I will.
I do think, but anybody from Mozart to Bach to anybody artists, masters of anything, it's been the continual practice of
Mhm.
doing it over and over again, even though it feels boring. And Eugene Peterson defines it. He calls it in his book, A Long Obedience in the Same Direction, which I can highly recommend. It's one of the most, he wrote this to his church as a discipleship book, but he said that's simply that. It's a long obedience in the same direction, which honestly sounds boring to me because I like a party, I like spontaneity. I'm like, who wants to do the same thing in the same direction for a long time? But that's only when you forget who you're walking with.
Yeah.
And when you remember who you're walking with, which is Jesus, it's that long obedience that you get to develop this intimacy with him. He also defines it as rather than sitting in an academic classroom, it's like you're sitting at the feet of a master craftsman who transforms you from the inside out. So that long obedience, just saying yes, even when you don't see the results, which I would say in the last 40 years, that's been a good portion. I haven't seen the results first. It was just saying yes, even when I didn't see it, just feeling that invitation from God. That's when I saw personally the most transformation. And then that's where you develop grit. And I tell the story in that chapter about Hagar, which I love this story because she was marginalized. She was not really accepted. Like she did what she was being told to do, but then finds herself in the wilderness without any hope. And the only reason she has this baby, her son Ishmael, is because, it was Sarah and Abraham who kind of pushed her into this position. And now she has no water, no food, and she's put her son underneath a bush to die from dehydration. And then God speaks to her. And I love that she names God the one who sees me. So even in that long obedience in the same direction, you're walking with a God who sees you. But I also love this so much. I don't know why I didn't see this before, but all of a sudden, when she's like surrendered to God, she sees God, he reveals himself. Then she sees a well that was there the whole time. It was there
Yeah.
the whole time, but
Right.
she just didn't see it. And why didn't some wells you're only going to find in the hardest places? The
Yeah.
deepest wells you're going to find in the hardest places. And more often than not, the well you're going to find is inside of you because you've said yes and you've developed the grit to keep going. So even if it feels like your dream is dying or it's not what you want it to, and you're like, it's dehydrated, it needs something, there's a well inside of you that part of it is just speaking resurrection and discovering your voice. But I just want to encourage you, don't give up. If whoever is listening, don't give up, whether it was a business idea or a relationship or whatever it is,
Yeah.
don't give up. Just keep speaking resurrection over it.
Yeah, I love that. I so what about just are there any topics that you think would be most helpful? Of course you talk about healing and emotional health, checking in with our heart, or the soil check. But there's so many themes and we're not going to get to all of them. So is there another maybe topic or concept in the book that you think is just really powerful that you want to share?
The book is the foundation is like, again, you have a voice, speak, and I do think that terminology you have a voice is overused. That's why I didn't include it in the title, because there's a million books on this, but you do have a voice. And I think as women, we can often be in situations where we don't feel like we're being heard. Like in the early days, I was the only female in a leadership table. So I had to learn how to communicate. Oftentimes I would whisper to I knew what the answer was, or I had an idea for the strategy, but I would whisper to my husband what it was because I had said things in the past and wasn't heard simply because of my gender. So I had to learn a couple things. So this chapter is Nobody's Listening. I just try to walk you through a couple ways of how to communicate. One of the things I had to learn was that if you're in a room with men, get to the point and tell the story later. Like
Mhm.
you have to get to the bottom line and just say, this is the bottom line, and I'll explain it later. Or come in with humility. Like, don't come in with a chip on your shoulder because nobody's listening to you. It's super easy to do that and get kind of bitter, like, okay, well, whatever. I'm at the table too. Can you not hear me? But I found that heart of serving and humility opens more doors. But what I did discover in writing this chapter it started out as I was going to write a chapter on how women can communicate with men. And it shifted as I started doing research because our brain immediately goes into assumption communication. And I can't tell you how many relationships, how many projects have been thrown off the ship because I assumed I knew what somebody was saying because my brain automatically goes down this trail. And they've done studies of the amount of people that have a little bit of deafness, and our brain is wired to compensate for what we don't hear. Or if you're like on social media and it's kind of like an algorithm keeps going down the same trail of whatever you're interested in. That's what your brain does. So then you start hearing through that perception. So I talk about how to shut that down. But to me, one of the most mind-blowing things is that Jesus led by asking questions. So Jesus has in the Gospels recorded 300 questions. The first time we hear God's voice in Genesis, he's asking a question. The first time we hear Jesus's voice, he's asking a question. When he's being raised from the dead, he asks a question. Who are you looking for? I mean, it's profound. And so I discovered that probably one of the greatest keys to being an influencer or a leader is curiosity.
Yes.
And asking even if you just start, like in the book, I list some of the questions Jesus asks. Even if you just start with those,
Yeah.
like, how can I help you? Or what do you want from me? Or well, who are you looking for? What are you looking for? Like those basic questions I found can take even a distressful, tension-filled conflict conversation to a place of peace and resolution if I just know how to ask the right questions, because then I'm more interested in what you think than what I know. And they have done studies that the greatest leaders are those who are willing to ask questions and collaborate with their team. I never want to be the smartest person in the room. Well, I don't ever feel like I'm the smartest person in the room, but I don't want to be the smartest person in the room. I want to learn from everybody that's around me. So I think getting really good at asking questions and becoming curious just kind of disarms, especially in the culture and the season we're in right now. Like, we're not even going to talk about politics, but just life. Like, how great would it be on social media if people were just asking questions rather than just, as Christians, railing each other because of our belief systems? Like, if I didn't know Jesus, I wouldn't want Jesus if you're representing him by that rather than how he led.
Absolutely agree with you on that note. And yeah, I so align with your comment, and I love that you had it in the book about curiosity. I've talked about curiosity, and I know you talk about being a lifelong learner. I mean, to me, it's very near and dear to my heart. Even before I did all the other things I did, I in 2008 had and still have a international or national family related family fun and educational site for kids, teachers, homeschoolers with my mom. I founded. And so even back then, we were sparking creativity and curiosity, in kids and families with our content. And so for me, that theme has been going on for a long time, like knowing the importance of it. So I love that you shared that. So let me ask you though, before we start kind of wrapping this up, what's something we haven't talked about yet that you think is the most important message you want women to take away from this conversation?
Oh, maybe two things. One is stop defending who you're not. Become curious to who God has entrusted you to be. Like, become curious. We just talked about that. I think I have a PhD on telling you why I can't do something and who I'm not. Well, I'm not whatever. I spent way too long doing that rather than just asking God, which is the whole book. I hope to guide you through that. Like, how can you discover who you are? And then the second thing I think is that you've been entrusted. So it's perspective. So the difference between being entitled and entrusted, I always thought entitlement was just ego driven. Like, you feel entitled to a position or a seat at the table. I would say, I'm sure, like, there's people listening that maybe have that posture. I would say the second aspect of entitlement is probably what most women wrestle with, and that is insecurity. So the second aspect of entitlement is I feel entitled to more before I use what I have. So I've become an expert on what I don't have. So God, when you give me more or whatever it is, then I'll start using it. And so I think entitlement has made us miss what we've already been entrusted with. And that was like in the first garden, Adam and Eve. I think we talked about this, but they already, the enemy tempts them with the one tree they're not supposed to eat from, helping them or luring them to forget what they've already been entrusted with. And so make a list. What do you love to do? I don't want another generation of women wrestling with the wrong perspective and not being used. I mean, graveyards are full of unused potential.
Yeah.
I want to stand in front of Jesus and he says, well done, good and
Yeah.
faithful servant. And also, by the way, let's not forget, Jesus already paid the price for everything that you have. So I don't want to waste the grace. I don't want you to waste the grace. I mean, it was a very costly price of his
Yeah.
life for you to walk with the entrustment that you have. So
I love that
yeah,
you talk about that too, because I definitely see that with a lot of women, which is we spend so much time caring for other people, serving other people that,
yes,
right, especially midlife, women tend to lose sight of who God made them to be. And they think that by pursuing interests or past interests or hobbies or passions or dreams, that maybe that's selfish. But I've even done whole workbooks on reignite your passion, but it's how do we step into what God has for us by knowing who he uniquely made us to be, right? And so
yeah,
I think somehow we've thought that if we think of what do we like doing, what are we good at, what has God made us curious about, we think that's selfish, but it's so not
so
selfish,
good.
because he made us each so different, to like different things, to be sad about certain things, right? Like you said, to have past experiences or traumas or whatever that might be.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so good. You're right. I don't think we take care of ourselves. You're right. We're so not wanting to be so we love giving. We're givers.
Right, that's
We're
right.
nurturers from the get-go. Like you need nurturing, just I can nurture the person at in the grocery store and the
Right,
getting fruit.
that's right.
But you're right. We get going so much that sometimes and also, I mean, that's a big point too, is that in every season, like this season I'm in, the entrustment that I have for this season looks different. It's all the other seasons that fed into this one, but it looks different. So every season it requires okay, God, what do you want to, here I am, here am I. What do you want to do with this season?
Yeah,
And so you're right. We can get so busy taking care of everybody else that we haven't taken. And that's great.
right.
But sometimes it's just stepping back for a minute. It's like, Lord, do you have more? How do is there something I'm supposed to see? Something I'm supposed to say? The Holy Spirit is more desiring for us to lean into whatever God has given us in this season than we are even. I mean, we want to hear it, but he wants us to hear it even more.
Yes.
So, yeah. And I think there's probably entrepreneurs that have tried in the past starting a business, and this is just your encouragement from God. Don't stop, keep going, build on even the things that you consider are failures. And some of you have kids that you're like, Lord, do something with these children. I've
Yeah,
raised them to follow Jesus, but they're not right now. The power of a praying mama is like
yeah,
huge. And just keep speaking life over them because you'll see God turn things around. Some of you, it's your marriage. Wherever you are right now, God wants to use this moment to pull out of you an entrustment that you probably didn't even know was there, or use what he's already given you.
yeah.
Don't minimalize it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I love, obviously you're in DC, so you probably know Mark Batterson, right? And
Yes.
yeah, but I mean, in his books, I love, that he talks about, and I forget if it was where he pulled that from, but that so many times we think our problems are bigger than God. We forget that God is so much bigger than our problems, right? And that,
Yes.
like you said, he is so much bigger. And yet, if we don't keep praying like that, we can think, like you said, my marriage is struggling, or my kids are struggling, or I don't know what to do with myself, and we can focus on that instead of focus on what he can do, that's so beyond even our we could fathom. And so
Yeah.
I love that you shared that encouragement with people about just keep on, just keep praying
Yeah.
for whatever it is that you're walking through, because it's so important. So Donna, let me ask you what my last question, I think, is what's fueling you up in this season? You've just moved, you have all these transitions going on, so what's filling you up in life right now?
Honestly, what I'm doing, I just love this season that I get to use all of what I walk through right now to encourage others. And I do think that sometimes leadership or influencing is a lonely place because you're not sure where safe spaces are, or maybe you had a safe space that blew up. So I love becoming that or creating circles of safe spaces. So that is, I think, probably what's really fueling me the most. And then also in the season of transition, there's like some things I'm like, I'm not super sure what's happening or what's next. Like you're doing a podcast. I'm like, do I do a pod? I don't know. I don't want to do anything at this point in life that God's not inviting me to do, because we all know what that feels like. Well, I've done that in the past. I'm like, it's way too much work.
Right.
But I do feel like that's my time with Jesus. I mean, if at the end of the day, my first appointment of the day is with Jesus. So that's probably what's fueling. I have through the years developed that. So that's fueling me. What I'm doing is fueling me. My grandkids are fueling me.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
and then also I would like, last note for anybody who's struggling with like your identity or your self-esteem or insecurity is, I would just encourage you to put a reminder on your phone of what God says about you. To
yeah.
me, and I do that in every season. Like, what is it that God says about me? So 5 times a day, the reminder comes up. It changes in the season so that you can't stop a thought that's contrary to God's word. You have to replace it. And so when you were talking about curiosity, it's like, become curious,
That's right.
then remind yourself so that it becomes a new neural pathway about who you are. So I think that's the word of God, time with him, and doing what you love is what's fueling you.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things is definitely learning, continuing to, I think every week I order so many books, it's kind of ridiculous, and I just kind of dig into six at the same time. But, you have, of course, time with,
Do the
I
same.
mean, of course, time with God and being outside, especially nature walks, just going and walking. And I have a micro practice or a gratitude and thankfulness practice. So all day long, some days I don't do it, but most days it's just a conversation constantly. It might be even about, of course, big thanks and gratitude, but even, oh my gosh, this basil on my sandwich is so amazing. Like, how did you come up with this flavor? So it's just this constant, I think that always
Love
keeps me
that.
grounded and fueled. And of course, time with my family and my friends, just being around people, in community. So
Yeah.
yeah. But yeah,
I
so
love that.
thank you so much for joining us today. Donna, can you share with people how can they find out more about your books and everything else you're up to and just connecting with you online?
Thank you. Yeah, you can follow me on Instagram, Donna Pasani. I am on Facebook as well, or donnapasani.org. It's .org is my website. So you can find the book on Amazon or wherever books are sold. And yeah, I'm excited about the future. Thank you so
Absolutely. Well,
much. What an honor.
thank you. It was great to have you on. You shared so much wisdom and just insights and encouragement with us. And your book is a beautiful book. I definitely encourage people to check that out if this conversation interests you. And thanks again for joining us today.
Thank you.